And we are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is TJ Southland, and I am hosting tonight's Zoom presentation for Melanie's Art Talk on behalf of Mufasa. This is the fourth and final Zoom talk of the semester being given by Brandon University's BFA honors students, and we are incredibly pleased to see everybody here. For those who are unaware, due to COVID restrictions, the Glen P. Sutherland Gallery of Art is currently closed to the public, and we are doing these talks over Zoom. However, all of the thesis exhibition works and the talks will be featured on the Sutherland website, which I will post in a moment. Melanie's work will also be viewable at the Wasagamon Community Arts this July, and all of the thesis students are working with Lucy Lederhendler at the AGSM to show their work this summer. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Brandon University and the Sutherland Gallery are located on Treaty 2 territory, which are the traditional homelands of the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Métis people. Bear with me, I don't have a lot of practice. I'm doing my best on this name. Our department name is Ishkabatens Wasage Inabateg, Department of Visual Arts. The first part of our name is our spirit name, which was given to us in 2017 by knowledge keeper Barb Blind. It means the little smoke that goes far, as once our students graduate, they go off their separate ways and carry their knowledge far with them. Tonight's artist talk will be given by Melanie Barnett. Melanie is a ceramics major who started her degree in 2016 and was a part of Mufasa for many, many years, including this year as our treasurer. Her thesis exhibition, Detritus, explores the impact that climate change may one day have on humankind and result in beautiful ceramic sculptures. Again, we ask that you remain mute while this presentation is being given, and Melanie will be available for questions afterwards. Again, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and without further ado, I hand it over to Melanie.
All right, thanks TJ. Nailed the pronunciation, by the way, good job. Hey everyone, thanks all for coming. It means a lot to have so many friends, family members, teachers, professors, mentors, colleagues, artists, and classmates here. Most of you, without a doubt, know me. But in case there's anyone here who doesn't, my name is Melanie Barnett. I'm a ceramics major here at BU, and this is the virtual presentation of my Bachelor of Fine Arts thesis exhibition, Detritus. Before we start, I'd like to shout out to Mufasa and Angel Rodriguez, the gallery coordinator at the Glen P. Sutherland Gallery of Art. Mufasa has put in many hours into making sure all of these thesis talks have run smoothly, and they've also been a great help in moderating the talks, as they will be doing again tonight. Angel has been an amazing help throughout this process, from assisting with lighting the exhibition to advertisement and publicity. So thanks to all of you, you're all great. I'd also like to thank my professors, my teachers throughout the years, and mentors, especially Barb Grexton, who was my elementary school, middle school, and high school art teacher. For context, I went to a K-12. So thank you for teaching me what a paintbrush was and how to draw. I wouldn't be here without you. Also, thank you to my friends, specifically to Leandra, who's in this call, for being a great support throughout this whole thing. One day, we're all going to go to karaoke once all this COVID stuff is over, and we're going to celebrate so many graduations, and it's going to be a great time. Lastly, I would like to thank my family, my sister Erin, for generally just being pretty cool and for letting me use her face in a lot of works throughout the years, and to my parents and grandparents for their continued support and for funding my education. It really means a lot, and I couldn't have done it without you. So without further ado, let's see if I can screen share. Yes, I can. Hello. All right, everyone can see that? Yes. I'd like to welcome you all to the virtual showing of my BFA thesis exhibition, Detritus. So I'm going to start off with the definition. So detritus is a product of disintegration, destruction, or wearing away. In ecology, it specifically refers to non-living organic matter, which is like leaves, animal remains, feces, etc., which fall into soil or water to then be broken down by decomposers. So this is an example of detritus, like leaves that have fallen onto the ground, and then they'll decompose and become soil eventually. This is from my backyard today. So this is the view of the gallery when you would first walk into the door. My artist statement is installed on the wall just next to my title over here. And instead of reading it all out right at the start of my presentation, I'm going to read sections of it as I go. So the first part of my statement says, detritus foreshadows humanity's fate in the context of the climate crisis. Mosses, liverworts, and fungi, all ancient organisms that have lived for far longer than we can imagine, consume human figures in grotesque, fantastical ways, reducing them to a state of detritus. The figures beg the question of our fate amidst a collapsing environment. Perhaps an untimely death to humanity is closer to destiny than it is to destruction. Maybe that is what it means to be human. So my work is made primarily of ceramic. There are a number of distorted human figures, such as this one. This is the first work that you would see when you come into the gallery. It's titled Gemini, which is twin in Latin. This work is a bit unique from the others in that it has two faces. This particular work was really about seeing how far I could stretch these mutations, the strange things that happen when these figures decompose rapidly. Just a disclaimer, this is not how human bodies decompose. This is Gemini from another angle. When I refer to moss, liverworts, and fungi as ancient, I mean that over the course of evolutionary history, many species within the fungal kingdom and within the classifications of moths and liverworts, they've remained essentially genetically unchanged for millennia. This image is a detail shot of Gemini, and so here you can see the moss texture that covers all of these figures. So moss and liverworts are both non-vascular plants. They don't have leaves or flowers, seeds, or stems like vascular plants do. So an example of a vascular plant would be like a tree or a flower. On the evolutionary tree, moss and liverworts are closer than a flower to the aquatic algae that all land plants evolved from. The moss in this image is from one of my closed ecosystem jars at home. So I've filled the jar with moss and dirt and water essentially, and I'm reproducing the water cycle and watching the moss grow. I like moss. So mosses reproduce through spores, and liverworts can reproduce in generally two ways. So on the left here, this is an actual image of a liverwort taken from, sourced from this website down here. And this is my sculpted version of a liverwort. So the species of liverwort that I became most interested in is Marchantia polymorpha, which is shown here, and that's the common liverwort. This plant can reproduce either sexually through spores or asexually through a plant organ called a gemmacup. In this image, the gemmacups are these little tiny ball things on the leaf-like structures, which are actually called thalluses. In these little cups, the liverwort produces these teeny tiny discs called gemma, and those contain all of the genetic material that it needs to reproduce. Raindrops splash on the gemma cups, dislodging the gemma, and once they hit the soil, they take root almost immediately, starting a new liverwort plant. The kingdom of fungi is also ancient. However, it is a much broader classification than the other two that I mentioned. Fungi are known for their relationship to the decomposition process, actively breaking down organic matter and returning the nutrients to the soil. And so, while I didn't focus on accurately replicating any specific species of fungus, I was heavily inspired by the phylum, which is a level of classifying organisms, called Basidia mycota, which is here. And so basically, it's a grouping of fungus that basically, if you think of any mushroom, just a generic mushroom, it's most likely in this phylum. So throughout the gallery, you'll notice that there are mushrooms and other fungal-like growths on the walls. This entire installation of just these fungal, moss, and liverwort growths is one artwork that took countless hours to create. The work's title is Ecosphere, The definition of that is basically the interaction between a planet's living and non-living components. So yeah, ecosphere. After you see this section of ecosphere, which is right behind Gemini, you see this work, which is called Playing God. In the context of ceramics, this work references the reassembly of a natural material into something new and permanent. In the context of the climate crisis, it references how humanity, especially those of us living in industrialized countries, relate our existence to the planet. In Western culture, we tend to think of ourselves as separate from nature. The idea of man versus nature is one that I'm sure we've all heard. What I've come to realize is that humanity isn't necessarily better or worse than any other organism on the planet, that we're all still part of this same cycle. So this is Playing God from the back. So in Playing God, the fungi, moths, and liverworts are stretching this figure's skin, mutilating it in grotesque ways. Here you can see that one of the figure's eyes is almost completely engulfed by this fungus. And they're trying desperately to look at their hand. However, their body is being decomposed in such a way that they can't. And so here are the figure's hands. The next part of my artist statement explains this process a little bit further. Beginning within the body, the spores of these ancient organisms take root in the host's lungs, eventually spreading to other organs by way of the bloodstream. So I developed this concept and the works in this exhibition during the pandemic, and COVID's influence, I think, can definitely be seen in these works. I decided to frame the exhibition as an infection, that the spores from the moths, liverworts, and fungi, all of which do reproduce through spores, would infect these figures, causing them to decay much faster than they originally would have. So in this image here, you can see another section of ecosphere, which is that fungal installation that I mentioned. And the work on the shelf here is called Skin Models, and it shows the stages of this infection a bit further. So the first model appears to be of healthy skin, yet if you look real closely here, and I apologize, it doesn't show up well on photographs, you can make out this spindly network of crisscrossing lines in the lower left-hand area. After the spores enter the host's body, they form a network of hyphae, or mycelium, which is the root-like network that fungi form underground. In the second model, which is shown here, I furthered this process. So when I created the characteristics for this infection, I decided that the plants and fungi would create this gas that would form bubbles under the host's skin, which is shown here. And so this is the gas bubble, and these dots are meant to represent spores. In the final stage, the moss, fungi, and liverworts erupt through the skin, splitting it, and then releasing more spores, which then go on to infect other people. This process specifically and directly references the climate crisis. So referencing the speed and severity at which the climate crisis affects our world, the moss, liverworts, and fungi erupt in a solemn beauty, releasing new spores, which will go on to infect other hosts at an exponentially increasing rate. So if you were to look to your right after viewing the skin models here, you would see this work here, which is entitled Remedium, which is Latin for restoring balance. So this work was sculptures that I made. Here, the figure's face is melting off. The holes in these works are actually an idea that I repurposed from the first clay course I took in university. I haven't been working with clay for very long. In September 2021, it'll be 3 years for me. When I first started working with clay, I was really interested in figuring out what it could physically do. I started making these small spheres, and then I cut many holes into them. I wanted to see how much I could put this material through, how much I could take away before it collapsed under its own weight. Spoiler alert, you can put a lot of holes into a sphere before it stops being a sphere. So a lot of you probably know this, but I used to primarily be a painter. And there was one particular moment that I can remember when I decided to leave painting. In 2018, I was working for the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba as a junior preparator, helping to install art. That summer, we installed a show by Winnipeg artist Diana Thornycroft who's in this call right now. Hi, Diana. The exhibition was called Black Forest, Dark Waters, and this image is a detail image of Herd, a work that was made over 100 horses, some of which Diana had altered, adding insect wings, aphids, skulls, hair, blood, etc. And she also melted them, which created some really interesting disfiguration. When I was working with Diana and her work that I realized that painting could never be what I wanted it to be. I wanted to create worlds, to create environments, figures, people, objects that real people could interact with in the same space. And so when we started pulling these horses out of their boxes, I had an epiphany. And then a few months later, I took my first clay course and then quickly changed my major. So I started making weird things and I started being unapologetic about it, that I decided that with working 3D, I was going to make the things that I wanted to make and I wasn't going to worry about, whether they were too weird. And so I just ran with this idea of distortion, stretching a figure's skin and then just making some strange and sometimes disturbing objects. So given the context of my work though, it may seem conflicting that I've chosen to use ceramic. Ceramic is a man-made material. We take clay, which is naturally occurring, and subject it to high temperatures in a kiln, forming a permanent material. This leads to the last sections of my artist statement. I'm interested in the permanence of ceramic. The works in detritus will continue to live for thousands of years after my death. They are, compared to the average human lifespan, immortal. In a conceptual push and pull between the permanent and the temporary, I have used ceramic and works on paper to comment on the lasting impact that humanity has had on the environment. Forever is a long time, and the ceramic works will tell our contemporary story for generations to come, while the works on paper mirror humanity's mortality. For too long, humanity has chosen to ignore the damage that we have caused the planet, and as a consequence to our own inaction, one day we shall pay the ultimate price. So this is a detail of the glazing on part of our medium. This is on the head behind one of the ears. And so I use ceramic to make these works specifically because it is permanent. I want these works to live for a very long time so that the story of the climate crisis in our time doesn't get lost to the ages. And so just behind Remedium is a series of 5 ink and watercolor drawings. These works are, I hope, quite obviously self-portraits, but I am also the model for every other work in this exhibition. Just the other ones have a lot of distortion. Part of the decision to use myself as the model was dictated by the pandemic. Difficult to hire models when you're not allowed to be in the same room as anyone else. But conceptually, it also made a lot of sense. Detritus is a reflection of my anxieties, specifically those surrounding the climate crisis. At what point does the damage to the environment become irreversible? And how will that affect the rest of my life? And how will that affect the generations after me? So going from left to right, the first drawing in the set is blight, which is named after a plant disease, which is caused by fungus. All of these drawings are 18 inches by 24 inches and are made with ink and watercolor. The next drawing is called Botanist. Here the figure is reaching out to examine their face, almost touching the fungus and the moss that are growing from their eye socket and cheek. For anyone who doesn't know, a botanist is a scientist who studies plants. I felt that this title gave the figure some autonomy, that they aren't completely at the mercy of this organism. In the center, we have Sprout. When I made these works, I was in quarantine. I stayed home before Christmas so that I could see my family. And then I quarantined when I returned to Brandon. So for about a month total, I wasn't able to access the ceramic studio and I didn't have the facilities at home to work with clay. So I had to change my medium to something more accessible, something that I could do at home. So I went back to my roots, which was ink and watercolor, which is what I first learned when I was about 6 or 7. At the end of November, my hometown Grandview made the news. Our local hospital had been shut down, so that medical staff could be reassigned to assist with the growing COVID outbreak in the Grandview Personal Care Home. The hospital was reopened about a month after it closed, but for those of us from that community and those who still live there, I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say it was hard. With the Grandview Hospital closed, if anyone had had a medical issue or emergency, the closest hospitals were in Dauphin, which is half an hour away, or in Russell, which is over an hour away. This whole situation reinstated the reality of rural healthcare, that healthcare in rural communities is not always a right, that provincial budget cuts to healthcare can severely affect entire communities, leaving them stranded far away from help. So I was working on these drawings during part of that month-long period. And so this work, Dissect, sort of brought that idea of medical intervention into the works. This is the only drawing, actually the only work, where a second figure is present. Those hands are not the red-headed figures, they're another person. The last drawing in this set is Abscess, and it was actually the first of this suite of drawings that I made. These drawings became more about myself. I wasn't distorting the figure so much, and I was keeping some of the defining features, such as my hair. I was doing a lot of self-reflection at this time, thinking about how both the climate crisis and the pandemic affect me within the larger whole of humanity. I also installed the drawings so that they sit a bit further away from the wall. There is about an inch gap between the wall and each drawing. So I separated the gallery into two parts. When the viewer enters the space through the front door, I wanted them to be thrown into this agony and distortion of these figures. As the viewer moves onto this part of the gallery, though, the energy becomes a lot more subdued, a lot quieter. This next work is called Slept Within the Soil. To me, this work is a lot sadder than the others. This figure follows the decomposition process further. This time, their entire face has been consumed, and it has fallen into the ground. In all of these works, I use the face to, I guess, symbolize the self. Slowly, the figures lose their faces throughout this process, like their sense of identity, and they become just bodies that are decomposing and barely human. So I did try to keep some small moments of consciousness and humanity. So in Remedium, that was the ear and the belly button. Playing God also has a belly button. And in the case of Slept Within the Soil, it's a hand laid over the back of the head. And so that's how I kept their identity as humans. So even though these works are very obviously not real people, I do tend to think of them as people. I've spent a lot of time with each one of them. They all have their own personalities, their own stories, and they interact with 3D space in the same way I do, even though admittedly that is lost quite a bit over Zoom. These works have lives even though their lifespans are measured in millennia instead of decades. So with that in mind, you can imagine the sinking feeling in my gut when this work, take it in, became this during a kiln malfunction earlier this year. At this point, I had a decision to make, and in the end, I did decide to salvage the pieces. Me and Janelle, who's also in this call, hey Janelle, her work was also destroyed in this kiln. It's this pot here underneath this boat. The head of my work smashed like a bowling ball into her pot. We spent a while cleaning out this wreckage we call a kiln, and that process did involve a vacuum cleaner. Then I spent another few hours sorting through all of the pieces, picking out which ones were from my work and which ones were from other people's works. As I pulled out and analyzed each shard, I found that I could tell which pieces were from the outside surface of the work and which pieces would have been unglazed on the inside. I put these pieces into two piles, those that would have had glaze and those that wouldn't have had any. This image shows my glazing setup. It took over 5 hours to glaze all of these pieces because there are several glazes on each of my work, although there's not much of each glaze. And this time allowed me to reflect on my work. It was a bit sad. I remember pulling out So this figure originally had a hand that was outstretched, and I remember pulling out the broken hand and feeling really sad. And then I pulled out the fingers that fell off of that hand, and they fit perfectly. And it was just really sad. So the final result was this: a sculpture that had literally disintegrated. It had literally become detritus, and it was actually part of the inspiration for the title of this body of work. I titled it Deity, or God, essentially. So in ceramics, disasters happen to both beginners and masters, and the clay gods, as we call them, they don't discriminate based on your skill level. Sometimes there's nothing you can do, like in this case. Because of these disasters, ceramicists have what are called kiln gods, which are small works that you place in and around kilns as a sort of offering. The idea is that if a disaster, like a kiln malfunction, happens, then the little kiln god will protect your real work from harm. In this particular kiln, there was a bunch of work from the intro clay class, and all of that work pretty much made it out alive. There wasn't much damage to it. So we now joke that my work was the largest kiln god the studio has ever seen, hence its name, Deity. So Deity is the last work in detritus. The viewer, after seeing that work, would end up back at the front door. I do have a short video. I'm not entirely sure that it's going to work. So if it doesn't, we can just crop this out of the recording. But I'm going to play it. It's just of me walking around the space, just so that you can get an idea of what the space feels like. And so that concludes my artist talk. Thank you all so much for listening. And I will now stop screen sharing and open the floor to questions. You can all turn your video cameras on now.
At this time, we will now be opening the floor for questions for Melanie. You may feel free to ask them directly, or if you're shy or you don't have a good microphone, or if you don't know how to unmute yourself, you can enter them into the chat and I will help direct those questions to Melanie.
Melanie, it's your Aunt Maggie calling.
Hi, Aunt Maggie.
I think you must have inherited all the artistic elements of our family. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This is 6 months of my life, with the exception of the 4 other courses I took over that period of time.
All right.
I have a question. I don't know if people remember, but I can't actually see my video, so I hope that I'm framed properly.
Yep, you're in the frame.
In the tour that you gave us in the last moment, that you had isolated your works on paper from the ecosphere installation, and I was like that there was kind of this pause while you were working on paper, and I was wondering if there was a reflection in that decision.
I can't remember which image I used. If you think back to the there was an image from when I was standing closer to the center of the room, looking at that one sculpture remedium with the works on paper in the background. On the edges around the corners, there was part of ecosphere there. It was just not as much in as other areas. So my goal with that was to slowly kind of taper off the ecosphere installation to I guess, make the second half of the gallery a bit quieter, more reflective, because the last two sculptures are pretty sad.
Well, I think that's kind of the nature of the question is like, why did the installation have to pause for the works on paper to be reflective, right?
I found that I didn't want the mushrooms to distract from those works on paper. Since they're the only thing on paper in the exhibition, I didn't want them to lose any of their power because there was so much 3D work in the space. So that's why I chose to give them a bit of their own space.
Thank you.
Melanie,
Hi, Calvin.
you do think that your works on paper are the strongest part of your exhibition.
Sorry?
They are utterly wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I
Hey,
have
Mel.
a.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good. You go.
Okay. I tuned in a little late, so I hope you didn't mention this at all, but the individual little mushrooms and everything's on the wall. How many do you end up having?
The count of it is a little questionable because some of them did break throughout the process. There are over 200 on the walls, though. And I wish I made more sometimes, but
Good for you.
I think that it was the right amount for this installation, but given that some of them broke, I was getting really nervous towards the end, like, is there going to be enough? But I feel like the amount that I had worked out.
I
Melanie?
have a question.
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So it's fantastic. The installation is gorgeous. But one thing that I want to know is you move and speak with such intent when you work on your pieces, when you consider them. And I wanted to know if you saw sort of an interaction between playing God, deity, and Gemini, because you make allusions to sort of the astral plane and spirituality in that sense. And do you see a sort of a religious influence in your work, or is it more at a distance?
It's more at a distance. I'm not a particularly religious individual, so I'm very distant from things like Christianity, I specifically didn't use the word Gemini, but the word Gemini, and I know that they are very similar, that the word Gemini comes from Latin, but the spelling of it as the Latin word instead of the zodiac was intentional to, I guess, not make it about zodiac.
Mm-hmm. It's more about, like, would you say, like, duality, especially with Remedium being so close to the piece?
Yeah, I would say so. But, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mel, it seems like your work is not really about religion, but about religiousness, about believing in something, as opposed to believing in something particular.
I don't know. It's not a read that I've had, but I mean, you can certainly have that read on it, I guess.
Okay, well, I will. It's lovely. The whole exhibition was just lovely.
Thanks, Cal.
I do think that there's something to using that Latin language and then choosing ceramics as a lasting, like, understanding that you're creating an artifact that will last for longer than something with less maintenance. So, like, using the Latin words is, oh, look at what has lasted this long, and trying to, like, establish what it is about the Latin language that gave it descendants that are still used to this day.
Yeah, that Latin has influenced a lot of languages.
Right?
Yeah, that Latin has influenced English and many other languages. And so while Latin itself isn't often spoken in everyday life, it does still come into our lives through, say, scientific naming of organisms, or in other fields, in languages that it shows up. And so it's it's bold, right? And so the idea of creating these lasting objects, these artifacts, as Lucy put it, yeah, I did try to tie that all together.
Melanie, I
Hi,
just wanted
Michael.
to say hi. I thought your presentation was spot on, and the exhibition looks really wonderful. I wish I could see it live, but I thought the whole thing was brilliant. Your conceptualization of everything, the way you spoke about it, the way you presented it, the quality craftsmanship in both the 2D and the 3D work, just really, really well done. I'm just very delighted for you.
Oh,
Congratulations.
thank you so much.
2 thumbs up.
Thanks. Means a lot.
Hey, Melanie, I'm going to jump in here because people keep jumping in front of me, and I just need to say that was bloody brilliant.
Sorry.
And I particularly like actually the sort of spiritual aspect to it, because I don't think you have to be religious to be spiritual. And I think that basically what you've done in many ways is almost like in the faith of the Druids there, we're talking about our world and our environment. And I think you've captured something there that's really important. And I would love to have this at our gallery.
We will have to talk later then, because I would love to have it at your gallery.
Excellent.
I'm in.
I'm just going to hop in here. Maria has a question in the chat. How did you finally choose what your thesis would be about? Or has the subject matter always been something of interest to you?
Oh, here we go. So this particular concept took on many different forms throughout the last 6 months or so, since September. Even before then, I was trying to develop it a few months before that, and it kept changing. I knew that at the core of it, I wanted to make a statement about the environmental crisis, using ceramic and using this figure design that I had created. I wasn't sure how to tie it all together, so it did take on a few different forms. And so if anyone here was talking to me maybe 4 months ago and had this idea of what my thesis is, and it's no longer that, that's why, is because the idea has changed. I cut a large concept a few months ago. And I think it made it a lot cleaner and a lot clearer for the viewer in the end. I'm a lot happier with it than any iteration that I had before this. But yeah, I was pretty set on the climate crisis idea of it. It was just how to present that was the issue.
Does anybody have any other questions for Melanie?
Just a comment. Aunt Maggie again.
And
I definitely can see your country upbringing expressed in all of this. Like, what those lichens, those moss, all that looks like. You didn't have to go and get a book. You saw it where you grew up.
yeah, exactly. I found that, and this is actually something, so I took a course called Advanced Drawing earlier this semester. And so in that class with Lisa Wood, who's here, hi Lisa, I had to create a body of work, which I worked with the idea of home using gravel roads. And so I found that through creating that work, that body of work for that class, that almost all of my work up till this point had something to do with the idea of nature or the land or home in some way. So this body of work is no exception to that.
We have
Hey,
another.
Mel.
Oh,
Who's
It's
going?
Auntie Sue. It's Auntie Susan.
Hello, Auntie Susan.
I just want to make a comment and just say what a wonderful exhibition.
Oh,
You are awesome. Your work is fantastic. And I wish I could be there and walk through it in person. You did an awesome job. I'm so proud of you. Uncle Lino's proud of you. Great job. You are just so talented. And
Oh,
you're gonna go far in the art world, my dear.
Thanks.
We love you. We love
Love
you.
you too.
We have another question in the chat from, I do not know how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry.
Deirdre.
Deirdre. And they are asking, did you make your molds or did you make molds for the mushrooms?
No, each mushroom is individually handmade. It took a very long time. It was an intensive 3-week period where I would wake up in the morning, I would go to the studio, and for about 10 hours a day, I would make mushrooms.
I have another question.
Yeah,
Did
sure.
you take any botany courses? Because you're very knowledgeable, and I'm curious if you did any courses either at BU or somewhere else around botany and mycology.
I would love to. The only thing that I've taken formally is an intro to biology course here at BU, which I took as one of my natural science electives. And I took that course specifically to develop this body of work, that I tried to make it in line with everything. However, that course didn't really touch too much on ecology, plant life, botany, etc. So I've done a lot of reading on the side.
I would like to know how you get all of those little mushrooms and growing things to stay on the wall. Is that some artist secret?
No, it is straight sewing pins and screws. So for the larger ones are screwed in with just, standard screws. They have, when I built them, I made holes in them so that they could be screwed to the wall. I can see Diana's comment out of the corner of my eye. The smaller ones, like the standard cap mushrooms, they have 2 little holes. So if you imagine my hand is like the cap of a mushroom, there's 2 holes here. And so a lot of those holes were too small to put a screw through because the glaze ran into them and closed the hole. So what I did is I would tap 2 little holes in with a nail. And then I found that broke the paint on the wall just enough that I could push a straight sewing pin in with the butt end of a pencil and then mount that mushroom on those 2 pins. And that was enough to hold it because it didn't weigh much. It took a while. There's a lot of holes in the wall. Me and Angel are going to have a good day patching them sometime.
It's very meticulous work. Way to go.
Thanks. Okay, I have to.
Hi, Melanie. I was a little late coming in.
Who is that? Oh, that's Jewel. Hey, Jewel.
Hi, I was a little late coming in. I thought it started at 8.
Oh, no,
So
mine was at 7.
I
Sorry.
came early, but I'm late.
That's okay. The recording will be available on the website.
Oh, I could have been here at 7.
It's okay.
Okay, but I know that you will have a great art career and
Okay.
you will be a wonderful person in life.
Oh, thanks, Jewel. We'll have to have coffee sometime. I haven't seen you in a while.
Maria has another question.
Yeah, I miss you guys. Really big time.
Maria has another question in the chats. I have a feeling that the world is your oyster. And what are your future artistic plans and or education?
All right. So this is a conversation I've been having with multiple people recently. So us thesis students, we're currently working with Lucy Lederhendler and the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba to exhibit some pieces from all of our theses in the community gallery at the AGSM this summer, just so that the public can see some of the work in person, which is great. Thanks, Lucy. My work will also be displayed at Wasagaming Community Arts during the month of July. Thanks, Judy. And my future artistic plans. I recently found out that some of the work from this body of work will be published in an international emerging artist magazine called Art Maze Mag, which they haven't finished putting together the publication, but in a couple months it'll be available for purchase. So that's pretty exciting. Eventually I'd like to go to grad school, but I haven't quite decided what I would go for yet. I'm currently leaning towards a master's in management studies or a master's in gallery studies. I really want to work at the organizational level and work in galleries running them. I really like installing artwork, even though it took so long to install all of those 200 and some mushrooms. I had a lot of fun. So I'd like to keep doing that for a little while. So I guess we'll see what happens, you know, where the wind blows.
We also have a question from Kathy. When does your show open in Wasagaming?
Oh man, I don't know the date off the top of my head. Is Judy still in this call? Any Judy's? Doesn't look like it, unless I missed her. I don't know the exact date. If you go to Wasagaming Community Arts, their website, it should be on there. If not, the date is on their social media platforms.
I have a question for Mel.
Yeah, sure.
First off, we're all very proud of you. It was an amazing job.
Thanks, Erin.
And I would also like to ask what project in this whole show had the most influence on you as an artist?
Honestly, I'd say it would be Deity, the one that blew up. Because that work was going to be on my poster. There was a really interesting angle where I would photograph it from under the hand looking up the face. And so I had decided to use that for promotions when that came out of the kiln, and then it exploded horrifically. So that work really taught me that in ceramics, not everything can be controlled. And so that is, depending on how you look at it, the upside or the downside of working with clay, that you don't always have control, and that's just life. But yeah, I would say that, you know, the problem solving that I had to go through with that one, picking out all of the pieces and then deciding, what am I going to do with this? Because this took 80 hours to make. I got to do something. I can't just throw it in the garbage. So figuring out what I was going to do with that, and you know, the idea of working with what you have. But yeah, Deity.
What do you think you would have done if the head had crashed too?
You know, it still probably would have been installed in a similar way. I remember, so I have a work, actually I'll get it. Lisa knows what this is. So I had this sad little head. It's a self-portrait that I did a while ago. Sitting in my thesis studio for over a year now. And so it was a mistake what happened. I was still learning how to build busts, and so it had collapsed from the neck down. And so I fired it again because it was my fault that time, and it was definitely me skimping on building techniques and not doing it the right way. So this was a reminder of what not to do and to never do that again, because that's the consequences. It falls apart. Lisa Wood, my professor, really liked it. And so I remember when this work came out of the kiln finally, she was just enamored with this head. She was so excited that she got her severed head. But yeah, I remember me and Janelle pulling this out of the kiln and just being really surprised. We're like, all right, how bad do you think it's going to be? And I lift the head up. and it's perfectly intact. So yeah, I don't know. I probably would have installed it the same way, but it was just really strange that it was in one piece.
For those of you who are curious, Michelle and Dauphine just let the chat know that the show will be happening from July 9th to 27th in Wasagame.
Cool. Thanks, Michelle.
Does anybody have any further questions?
Oh, somebody.
I have one final question for you, Melanie. Did you count how many pieces there were in Deity?
I didn't count them. There are too many. Some of them I didn't end up, they didn't all end up in it. Eventually I got really tired of just sorting through all of the crumbs. A lot of it was dust. So yeah, I don't know, maybe one day I'll count them, but for now it's just scoop it up with a dustpan and get it in the box.
I completely understand that. Are there any other questions? All right, at this time, we'd like to thank everybody again for coming to this talk. Once again, if you would be interested in seeing these works further, they will be featured on the Glen P. Sutherland's website, thesutherland.ca, as well as this summer at the AGSM. This was the fourth and final talk of the Fine Arts Honors students this year. On behalf of BUFASA, and not to speak for the faculty, but I'm sure the fine art faculty as well, we are all very thankful that you came out with these talks. These were really incredible, and all of the students who partook and did the talks were frankly amazing. So thank you for coming. At this time, I will be ending the recording, but you may feel free to stay and mingle for as long as you like.